December 26, 1944. Lubang Island, Philippines. Humid air clings to canvas and skin. Mosquitoes carve thin, angry red moons across exposed forearms. Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda stands under a thin canopy, palm fronds whispering like distant radio static. He wears a scuffed khaki tunic, gaiters muddied to the knee, a leather map case slung at his hip. In his hands, an Arisaka rifle, a bandolier, a small hand mirror, and sealed orders from headquarters to conduct guerrilla warfare, gather intelligence, and do not surrender. Voices bark in the dark as boats pry away from the shore. The world beyond the trees, cities, newspapers surrender, feels as distant as the stars. He steels himself for missions no one else knows will last decades. By February 1945, Allied troops had already crushed Japanese strongholds across the Philippines. But in the dense, wet jungles of Lubang, Hiroo Onoda refused to believe it was over. The roar of gunfire had faded, but he took that silence as a sign of temporary retreat. With 3 other soldiers, Shimada, Akatsu, and Kozuka, he built a hidden base deep inside the forest. They hunted wild boar, stole rice from nearby villages, and kept watch for enemy movement. Every night, Onoda cleaned his rifle by the dim glow of a firefly lamp, whispering to himself the Emperor's last known orders: never surrender. To him, the war still raged on, unseen but ever present. When villagers dropped leaflets saying Japan had surrendered, Onoda examined them carefully, his jaw tightening. Enemy propaganda, he muttered. He tore them into pieces and buried them beneath the wet soil. As the 1950s dawned, Hiroo Onoda's world had shrunk to the jungle canopy above and the muddy rivers below. Monsoon rains hammered the leaves, forming puddles deep enough to hide a man's tracks. The other 3 soldiers had either surrendered or vanished, leaving Onoda alone with his rifle, a machete, and his unwavering mission. He learned to move silently through the undergrowth, tracking Japanese patrols from decades past in his mind, imagining enemy soldiers in every clearing. Villagers who tried to approach were met with carefully aimed warning shots. He survived on coconuts, bananas, and whatever wildlife he could trap, burying caches of food for the dry months. The jungle became his fortress and his prison. Years passed, yet he remained vigilant, convinced the war had not ended, and that each mission could decide the fate of his homeland. Throughout the 1960s, Lubang Island slowly modernized around him. Roads cut through forests, children played near villages, and occasional travelers stumbled into his hiding spots. Onoda, however, interpreted each sighting as hostile reconnaissance. He sabotaged farms, burned fields, and ambushed anyone who ventured too close, all in strict adherence to his orders. Once, a local teacher tried to reason with him, waving leaflets and speaking of peace. Onoda's eyes scanned the horizon, his finger resting on the trigger. The Emperor's command is eternal, he growled. Each attempt to convince him that the war had ended only reinforced his determination. In the solitude of the jungle, Onoda's mind had blurred decades into a continuous campaign. The world had moved on, yet he remained a soldier frozen in 1945, fighting battles no one else could see. By the early 1970s, Onoda had been living in the Lubang jungle for nearly 3 decades. His once youthful face was lined with age, his uniform faded to muted greens and browns, and his rifle bore the patina of countless rainy seasons. He moved like a ghost through familiar trails, evading local authorities who occasionally ventured into the forest. Occasionally, he stumbled upon the remnants of abandoned camps, rusting vehicles, and torn leaflets from governments trying to reach him. Each time, he read them with suspicion, convinced it was deception. His survival was a testament to discipline, training, and an unyielding sense of duty. The jungle, once an enemy battlefield, had become a labyrinth of survival and solitude, a place where time had no meaning and the war never truly ended. February 20th, 1974. A young Japanese traveler named Norio Suzuki trekked into Lubang's dense jungle with a camera, a notebook, and a dream. To find a soldier who refuses to die. He had heard whispers of Onoda, a man still fighting a war that ended decades ago. Days of careful tracking led him to a small clearing where Onoda emerged, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes sharp and wary. Suzuki approached cautiously, calling out in Japanese. Onoda's hand tightened around his trigger, muscles tensing like coiled wire. But something in Suzuki's calm and persistence slowly cracked the walls of decades-long isolation. He listened to stories of the modern world, of Japan's surrender, and the peace that had endured. Yet Onoda could not surrender, not without official orders from a superior officer. March 9, 1974. A small plane landed on Lubang Island, carrying Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, Onoda's former commanding officer. Dressed in the crisp insignia of the Japanese army, he approached the jungle clearing with a mixture of awe and solemn duty. Onoda, standing tall despite decades of hardship, felt a flicker of recognition. Major Taniguchi bowed deeply. "Lieutenant Onoda," he said, voice steady but heavy, "the Emperor and your superiors officially relieve you of duty. The war is over. Return to Japan." For the first time in 29 years, Onoda lowered his rifle. Silence hung over the clearing, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. The man who had lived decades in combat now faced the surreal peace of a world that had moved on without him. Tears welled in his eyes, mixing with sweat and dirt, the cost of unwavering loyalty. March 11th, 1974. Hiroo Onoda stepped off a small plane at Narita Airport, Japan, greeted by reporters, cameras, and a nation astonished by his story. The bustling streets, flashing neon, and roaring automobiles overwhelmed him. The world he had known had vanished. Yet, despite the shock, Onoda moved with dignity, recounting his years in the jungle with precision and honesty. He spoke of survival, duty, and the invisible war he had waged alone. Some marveled at his resilience. Others questioned the cost of unwavering loyalty. Still, for Onoda, the jungle and its battles were not memories to be forgotten. They were proof of a soldier's commitment, a life spent holding a war that had ended decades ago in his hands. Hiroo Onoda's story became legend, a symbol of loyalty, endurance, and the complexity of duty. Scholars debated the morality of his actions. Villagers remembered the sudden raids, and soldiers admired his discipline. Onoda himself chose a quiet life, opening a small bookstore in Tokyo, yet never forgetting the jungle that had been both his prison and sanctuary. His life raises haunting questions. How far should loyalty extend? At what point does duty become obsession? And how does one reconcile decades lost to a war that history had already closed? Onoda's jungle was not merely a battlefield. It was a mirror reflecting the enduring human spirit, the tension between obedience and freedom, and the staggering cost of holding onto a past that had long since ended. In his later years, Hiroo Onoda often spoke quietly of the jungle, the loneliness, and the unwavering faith in orders that sustained him. Visitors would ask how he survived, and he would smile wryly. Discipline, patience, and belief in something greater than oneself. Though decades had passed, the lessons of his isolation remained vivid, a lifetime etched into the lines of his face. Onoda passed away in 2014, leaving behind a story that transcends borders and generations. He was a soldier who fought a war that the world had long since forgotten, a man caught between duty and time itself. His tale reminds us of the thin line between heroism and obsession, and of the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit in the face of impossible odds. Hiroo Onoda's incredible story shows us the extraordinary lengths a person can go in the name of duty. For 29 years, he lived in a world frozen in time, holding on to a war that had long ended. His life challenges our understanding of loyalty, perseverance, and the human spirit. If you were inspired by his story, make sure to subscribe to America in Time for more astonishing tales from history that feel too incredible to be true.